I'll be responding to the claim that low socioeconomic status causes learned helplessness. And the secondary claims I'll be responding to are that children in low socioeconomic status households are deprived of enriching environments, that children feel they have no control over the outcomes of the world and are inhibited by their environments, and that people cannot deal with the stress leading to a reevaluation of their environment. Regarding the first claim, that children in low socioeconomic households are deprived of enriching environments, there are a number of issues with the cited study supporting this claim. The cited study by Gary Evans found that there is a statistically significant relationship between cumulative risk exposure and learned helplessness. However, the amount of time children spent on the associated impossible puzzle test was about the same for children with 1, 5, and 7 cumulative risks, the highest in the study. The statistical significance may not necessarily indicate a real-world difference. Also, the study's experiment on self-regulatory behavior illustrated that children with more cumulative risks seek more instant gratification. This could run against the learned helplessness hypothesis, as these children realize that they can take opportunities in order to fulfill their desires more immediately. Finally, the author notes that his is possibly the only data available on cumulative risk and learned helplessness after he searched for other similar data. More recent and abundant data is needed to confirm the link further. In response to the second claim, that children feel they have no control over outcomes of the world, there are also a number of issues with the study supporting this claim. First, the sample size of the 2 experiments done in the study by Christopher Peterson et al. Are very small, with 40 and 72 test subjects respectively. Second, the study seems to indicate that it is explanatory style, or how people rationalize an event occurring, that has more to do with developing learned helplessness rather than just a large amount of negative events occurring in one's life. Finally, the majority of the test subjects were college students who were only 21 and a half years old on average. The findings may not reflect upon the reality of low socioeconomic status individuals, especially children. Regarding the third claim, that people cannot deal with the stress leading to reevaluation of the environment, I could not find information regarding the cited messenger's theory. The claim itself seems to be just a rewording of the major claim that negative effects prevent future success through learned helplessness, and doesn't really help to strengthen the major claim, as it seems to be circular reasoning in some regards. To conclude, much more data is required to definitely link low socioeconomic status to the development of learned helplessness. Thank you.
Do you have the evaluation rubric?
Yeah.
Well, will you put them together? That's kind of how we do things. And then you can bring it back to me. Thank you. Well, Anthony, I think you display a pretty good understanding of the argument that's being presented. You summarized it well at the beginning, so it's relatively clear. Even though it was a complex idea in the first place, the simple way in which you described it, I think, makes it easier for us to follow your responses. On that first point, basically you're challenging the acceptability of the research that the advocate presented. And it sounded to me like you had some legitimate criticisms of that research. And it sounds like those criticisms come from the scholar who did the research themselves, at least on the second part. But that was not very clear. I think, if it's a caveat that a person has in their research, you need to say that and say, okay, the advocate cited this particular person who supposedly said this thing. But later in the article, this individual said this about their own research. That way I know where that information is coming from. It sounded a little bit clearer that that's what was going on in the second criticism, where they say in their literature review, this is the only data that I could find on this particular subject, so additional research needs to be done on this. That seems to suggest that, here's a problem. We don't have any external confirmation of this other than this person's admittedly unique information on the subject. I don't know how old the data is, if there's been any subsequent research on the subject, and you're not doing a literature review, so that's all that we're getting on that particular point. On the second point, you've got some general criticisms, and by the way, these general criticisms would apply to almost all sociological research, which 90% of the time is done on college students because they're the subjects that are available to sociologists and psychologists and folks like that. They can get people from their psychology class to participate in their studies, and that's why they get those particular results. So, those are reasonable presses, and I think you've got good arguments, especially the ones where you say, look, we're talking about college students, and they're making inferences about children and their sense of helplessness, and there's a vast difference between those. I think that makes a lot of sense. But again, I don't know if you're giving us any source citations on this, or if you're just making general arguments about those things. I think those are good general arguments, but you can find something substantive to support them also. And I think you've got a reasonable point on the third point, that it basically begs the question. It simply is repeating the same argument again. There's a lot of reading that goes on in the presentation, and sometimes that's necessary because, let's face it, you're kind of dealing with this esoteric thing, and to understand it, you've got to be analytical and look at it and write it all down. The problem is it's not a very effective oral communication style, so sometimes you have to simplify it, cut to the chase. Here's the point that I'm making here, instead of using the language of the research literature or the scholarly approach. Put it in a context that makes sense to the audience that you're speaking to. And I got the feeling that sometimes I don't want to say, it's not necessarily you, but the world's full of everybody. You know what I'm talking about. You've written essays where you've tried to BS your way through the essay, right? And let me make it sound like I'm saying a whole lot when you're not really saying all that much. There's a lot of scholarship that is that way too. And I think that sometimes it gets a little esoteric, and it's a lot easier to just come down and say, nobody else says this is true. That's it. You don't have to do much more than, just be that clear. All right, thank you.